Hello and welcome to today's episode of Navigate, sponsored by Global Tax Focus. I'm your host, Jim Dawson, and today we have with us Miriam Name of CCN. She is a very distinguished Mexican attorney based out of San Antonio. Welcome, Miriam. Glad to have you.
Thank you for the invitation, James.
No problem. So what we want to do today, we just want to have a conversation about Mexico. Our neighbor to the south, and I think it's important that we get the Mexican perspective on a couple different issues. So let's first have Miriam introduce herself and her firm, and then we'll get into our conversation. Miriam, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and about your firm?
Thank you very much. Well, basically, my name is Miriam Name, like you said it. I'm a Mexican licensed attorney specialized in tax and customs. We are CCN, Cascio Cavazos and Newton. It's a law firm in the United States, but we consider ourselves like a binational. We could even say a Mexican law firm in the United States. We have several offices in Mexico, 8 offices in Mexico, 3 in the United States. Most of our attorneys are bicultural, binational. And let's say we were born in the 80s, we're gonna be 30 years old next February, and we were born with the NAFTA, with the old NAFTA, now the USMCA. So we called ourselves kind of a NAFTA law firm.
Oh, okay. And so your attorneys, can you real quickly mention a couple of the offices in Mexico so our listeners can get an idea of the breadth of your reach?
Sure, we're in Mexico City, we're in Querétaro, where we cover all the Bajío area, which is the Guanajuato, the León section, Tijuana, Ciudad Juárez, beautiful Guadalajara, Matamoros, Reynosa, and we also have the offices in the US, in San Antonio, in Austin, and in McAllen.
Perfect. All right, so let's get into this. Can you describe for us just the general Mexican economy and business environment? What does it look like?
Well, I think that we all know that after COVID, the world changed. And it was already changing, and we were talking about distribution from all around the world. And with what unfortunately or fortunately COVID showed is that the economy changed in the sense that you couldn't bring things from all around the world on time anymore. You can source like you used to do, where you could bring from China, from Japan, from Korea to Mexico to manufacture. Because if now we realize that there could be some flaws in that, or there could be unexpected situations in that. We all remember the problem with the chips, the cars, and the chips. There were not enough chips. So we had new cars, 2019 new trucks, really parked in Detroit in whole parking lots. They couldn't get a chip, they couldn't sell it. So the economy and what people are seeing now is this nearshoring concept, which is basically that you have to find your source for your production closer to you. And Mexico is blessed to be close to the United States. It's blessed to be in a position, geographical position, where we have access to the United States, to Canada, to a Latin American market. So we are seeing a growth in the economy in Mexico that I think is just going to increase. Plus, the peso has been really strong, which is a surprise. And we believe it's going to stabilize again, but it's really interesting the growth that we're seeing in Mexico.
So you mentioned the currency. What about other factors that are contributing to Mexico's new growth?
Well, definitely we share a large border, as you all know. And what contributes is many factors. You have the labor factor on one side. we all know that labor is cheaper in Mexico. When they think Mexico, they think cheap labor. The 2024 minimum salary, for example, that has been published already, is approximately $20 per day. And that's the high, that's the border minimum salary. That doesn't mean that's what you pay, that's the minimum salary. But of course, it's a contributing factor for the growth. Also contributing factors are that we have a strong legal system that people, sometimes they think Mexico, and unfortunately they think it's lawless. But no, we're not lawless. We're not like in the West, Old West. No, there's a lot of protection. We are part of a lot of treaties for protection of intellectual property, which is very important for companies. We also have very top-notch facilities for production and really specialized people for the production. I have spoken with companies that, for example, are in the medical industry, and they need people by hand. They have to do a lot of the things in the cold rooms, and they tell me, we've never seen specialized labor like in Mexico. They're artists in the way they do the things. So that's very important for them. Of course, we're in the same time zones as the United States. A lot of people in Mexico speak English, so you have that understanding. And if you can access Mexico by land, you can also access by sea, by air, and that's a benefit. And in general, it's a benefit that we culturally, or we are very similar in the business way of doing things.
So with the skilled labor force, what are the industries that you see Americans coming down to set up operations? What does the skilled labor force look like, and what industries?
Electronics require a lot of skilled industry. Medical industry and agriculture. Agriculture investment in Mexico has increased so much. There's a limitation for the owning of lands to foreigners in agriculture, but we're able, through neutral investment instruments, to have foreign companies grow agriculture businesses in unbelievable ways. I mean, we're talking about tomatoes, strawberries, think of anything you can think about. I had one client in the tomato industry that they had their land in Colima and Guadalajara, beautiful place. And they had some women that were experts, very skilled in putting the little plant together. They could draft it and put it together in an amazing way. And the investor was telling me, I've never seen something like that. And they have a great product because of that. So medical, electronics, any kind of business that required specialized textiles. We saw a lot of textile industry move away from Mexico in the 90s, going to China. They all came back. They all came back to Mexico. They said, we don't get the same quality. And they rather come back, even if it was a little bit more costly for them, because in the long run, the quality was better and their business was better.
Yeah, I think a lot of people miss the whole idea of logistics and what logistics play in moving products from point A to point B. So when you look at China, the cost of logistics of manufacturing something in China and getting it to the US through the ports versus Mexico, what do you see as the big advantage from a logistics standpoint? Not just the proximity, but how has the Mexican government, the US government worked together to make sure that goods and services flow smoothly across our borders?
Right. Well, we have the USMCA, of course, as a treaty. and we can talk more about it. But location is really important, like it or not. I'm in San Antonio right now, so I know I can drive 2 hours and a half, and I'm in Mexico already. And that's a huge benefit. And there's not only one border. We have from Tijuana border to McAllen, wherever you want to go, and you have miles and miles of borderline, and you can cross through a lot of borders, but you have the sea. Also, somebody was telling me about the Miami port being open to importing millions and millions of loads from Mexico now, from the Merida to Miami. And it's such a short trip by sea, really short trip. So it's definitely, it has a huge impact, but again, also on the understanding of business. Just a full understanding of business. And we just using the same characters in the language, even if you don't understand that, you can use the same characters.
No, I think when you look back, when you step back and you think about Canada all the way to Argentina, but let's just focus from Canada down to Panama with the canal. There is just so much activity in this region where we can work with each other to help each other's people be employed, help our governments to be thriving. It's just a tremendous marketplace, the Americas, and Mexico plays a very, very significant part in that. So we have a lot of middle market companies and their owners that are looking at going to Mexico. News aside, where we see things good and bad on both sides, Mexico is very vibrant. So if a middle market company wanted to go to Mexico, what should they be thinking about before even approaching setting up an entity? What should they be thinking about?
Right. First thing is, what are your business plans? Do you plan to be there temporarily? Do you want to test the waters? Are you already did you already analyze your market and think this is where I want to be or not? A lot of our clients say, I just want to test the waters because I don't know if it's going to be a good business and I don't want to invest a lot of money, etc. So there are several ways of doing it. If you just want to test the waters, you can get into an agreement with somebody in Mexico, kind of a joint venture. Whether you create an entity or not, you can have an office of representation, which is a branch from the foreign entity, which is beneficial in some cases. In some others, I'd rather tell my clients, create a subsidiary. It's easier and cheaper too. Or, for example, manufacturing companies hire shelter entities. So a shelter entity basically in Mexico, if they just want to manufacture in Mexico for exportation, a shelter company, it's a Mexican entity that will provide them with all the services they need, the manufacturing, the lease, the location, the employees, the knowledge, the know-how of the customs, of the administrative issues, and charge them a percentage of the cost plus what we call, and let them manufacture in Mexico. And if it's a good business and you contact an attorney, sorry for the commercial, but it's necessary because you want a good exit clause. So what I've seen is that most of the businesses I've seen that go into Mexico, not knowing if it'll work out, and they start with shelters, after 5 years, they're like, I want to create my own company, my own maquiladora, my own manufacturing company in Mexico. This is a great business. How do I exit this shelter agreement? And then we help them create their own maquiladora, their own entity. But that's a good way to start in Mexico, through a shelter.
Excellent. And so if they want to go to the next step, which is actually setting up their own entity, how do they go about that?
Well, definitely, I recommend that they get attorney's help. Many times in what we've seen is that they say, oh, I got this manager or friend who knows the notary public who can create the company very cheap. You don't need to contact the attorneys. And I know this other friend who's an accountant, because everybody's friends in Mexico, right? We're all friends.
Everybody.
So, but unfortunately, they don't plan ahead what could be their taxes and customs and labors. I think of whenever you think of Mexico, I say focus on two things: tax and labor in the beginning. Tax and labor, and customs are taxes. Duties are taxes. So focus on those, ask about those, because those are the two most crucial things to think when investing in Mexico, because of the rules, the laws, they're different than in the United States. And you want to start from the beginning in a good way with the right foot. So when I think first thing, what is your plan? Are you planning to stay long-term, not or short-term? Okay. You say you already want to establish in Mexico because you already had a shelter or had other business and you know it's a good market. Well, we have to create a company. Companies need in Mexico at least 2 partners, 2 associates. And except for very specific sectors where you cannot invest in Mexico fully, like transportation, agriculture, where you can do it through a neutral investment, I'm going to focus on the general businesses. You can have 2 foreign associates. One can be 99.99%, the other one can be 0.01, but we need 2 associates. Create a company, can be a company of like an LLC type of company, it can be an Sociedad Anónima, Sociedad Responsabilidad Limitada, it could be depending on what's your project. If you want, we call them companies of people or companies of capital, okay? The companies of people, it's more like an LLC, depends on the individuals that form part of that, or the companies that form part of it. And the other companies depend on the capital for investment, basically. You create the company, you need a domicile in Mexico, a true domicile, not just in a paper. You need a true domicile. And then you get your tax ID. And then you start with employees and working in Mexico. Once you have all of that, we determine the tax rate for companies in Mexico is 30% right now.
30%.
Yes, it's 30%. So, and then you're the expert on the US side, and then you decide if you check the box or not. But if you want to check the box in the US, you have to create Sociedad de Responsabilidad Limitada, which is the kind of LLCs in Mexico. That's the one we create.
So the whole process, how long does it typically take? Are we talking about months, or can this be done in a number of weeks? What's the time frame for setting up a viable?
Setting up could be as fast as a week. What makes it a little bit take longer is first, if the client has all the information. Because at the time we draft the bylaws and articles of incorporation, we need powers of attorney, we need to know everything, and we need proxies. But now with the new rules of knowing who's the ultimate controller or the beneficiary controller in Mexico, which I understand also are in the United States now.
Yes,
so in Mexico, we started last year. I don't know when in the US, you'll tell us, Jim, but basically that makes it takes a little longer, because for some companies in the US, they don't have the information ready. So it can take, in a realistic speaking, I mean, I would say a month more or less, a month and a half to create the company.
Yeah, and I think what I'm hearing is that if an American company wants to explore Mexico, they need to go and explore the opportunities to dip their toe in the water, to make sure it's viable for their company, really understand how the Mexican labor market works, understand the regulatory and tax laws, so that they have a full appreciation of Mexico. Many times we see U.S. businesses, well, it's just like the United States. We do things, we can do the exact same thing in Mexico like we do in the United States. And that's not true. That's not true. But I think it's important that an American company have Mexican employees on the ground that are part of the management group to help them navigate through all of the waters that can get choppy at times when you're just starting. Once you get it up and operational, it goes pretty smoothly. Would you agree with that assessment?
Totally, totally. And what I've seen is that there's usually disconnect sometimes between because you think the way you do business in the US is the same in Mexico. So not only have your Mexican employees, but have advisors that you trust. Because I cannot tell you how many times we are that bridge between the US company and their Mexican employees.
Right.
Because they're like, I don't get this information. You know, in Mexico, we say ahorita, which means like in a little bit, and that means who knows when, you know, but it's cultural. And sometimes we need to make the people in Mexico understand that now means now, that that things are done differently. And sometimes we need our US investors understand how formalistic Mexican law is. I mean, if I could have to say, we're based on Roman law. So think of Louisiana in the US. That's the kind of law we have. We don't use the common law. So Mexico is so formal that if I get your name wrong or incomplete in the powers of attorney, the powers of attorney will be rejected when you try to open a bank account. As simple as that. So that disconnect, that's where we have to have a bridge of understanding and letting you know, well, this is the way it's done in Mexico. I recommend you do this or that.
And I think one of the things in dealing with CCN, and in particular in dealing with you, because you are a Mexican attorney and a US attorney, you know both sides of the border. And so you can help a company navigate through some disconnect on legal and tax terms. And it's very, very important. And I know that your firm is most willing to work with any US counsel as they help their client decide what to do in Mexico, and should they decide to move forward in implementing the best plan possible to help them minimize tax on a worldwide basis. And I think that's really, really important. A lot of people think that they have to have their counsel direct everything. And what I'm trying to propose here is really it's important to have co-counsel in this case to look at both sides of the border.
Totally. And that's what I tell them. And I always say, look at your US counsel, to look at your US accountants. I mean, you have to understand how business is done. And another thing you mentioned is that I've seen a lot of companies say, well, maybe you're too big of a firm I cannot afford you. You know, that's basically what a lot of clients. And I say, no. I mean, we are here investing with you. We like to see our clients grow. We'll make everything possible to serve you so you get a good legal advice from scratch. I've seen companies, I think that easily 90% of the companies that I see that they start in Mexico, with sometimes two employees in Mexico. By the time we set up the company, everything's ready, then they come back and say, we have 80 people now. And it's amazing to us because we love to see our clients grow. And then they're like, I have to set up another company, or I'm going to do this. I'm going to enter the Latin American market now from Mexico, right? Or enter another country because we have treaties with more than 40 countries in the world, free trade agreements. So they're like, now the possibilities are way more open, and you still have your US entities, and now you're Mexico and a new market. We are the door to Latin America.
Absolutely. And I think your point of being able to use Mexico as a stepping off point for the rest of Latin America, I do think we're going to see a new initiative to bring a lot of companies that were offshore in China and elsewhere. You know, we talked about nearshoring earlier, but bringing them closer, and the best place to bring them, if not the United States or Canada respectively, it is Mexico and all of Central America. There's vibrant, hardworking people that want an opportunity, and it would be, I think this whole issue with logistics and being able to get things moved quickly is a big benefit of doing business with Mexico in particular as the stepping off point for the rest of Central America and South America.
That's right. And you mentioned something very important, hardworking people. That's what I see when I see Mexico people working in the companies. They like, I don't know if it's a matter of culturally, but we say we put on the shirt of the company, you know, we take it personally, our job. So you see the very hardworking people that do the best they can to make a company prosper.
Yeah, I think, and that is important for American companies going into Mexico to understand the word culture. It's much more than just the Spanish language, much more. And I think it's important to gain an understanding of that and a respect for that, so that as issues come up, and they will, you can step back and go, oh, this isn't something they're doing because they're trying to offend me in some way. It's really cultural, and we have to work around the cultural norms to come to an understanding so that we can keep things moving.
Yes, exactly. Culturally and economically, like an example is in Mexico, we have the exchange rate profits or losses, okay? So let's say you have a credit agreement between your two companies, the US company funding your Mexican company, and the credit agreement is in dollars. But with the exchange rate being like 17, even 17, 18 this year, from 20 pesos per dollar that we had, there was an exchange profit that your accountants have to register in Mexico. And a lot of clients are like, in the US, what's going on? Why do we have to consider that? It's in dollars. I said, well, you can avoid exchange rate profit or losses by just dealing with it in pesos, for example. Oh, can we do that? Yes. So little things that you can get, and this piece of advice, you can now get it for 10 years. I mean, it's not that I have to be there every time you sign a credit agreement. Now you know it. Now you know what to think of, for example. So yes, it's very important to understand that culturally and legally, how it all is different.
I'd like to have our listeners go away with is your closing thoughts on how best to approach just doing business in Mexico. 3 things that you say, these are the 3 most important things you really need to think about. And I will say this, I've worked with you many times and with your firm, and I can tell our listeners that you will be more than willing to have a call with them and understand what they're doing and give them good advice. But for all of our listeners, can you give us your 3 things that they really need to keep in mind when doing business in Mexico?
Sure, definitely. Well, the first thing, and I don't want this to sound like a commercial, you can hire whoever you want, but get advice. Get advice from lawyers and accountants that understand cross-border issues. That's my first advice, get advice. The second one is what I said. think of taxes and think of labor. Those are crucial in Mexico.
Perfect. And so one thing you mentioned, I know you and I've talked about this before. You actually have a newsletter.
Yes.
You mind talking just real quickly about your newsletter and what's going on with what it contains and how our listeners might be able to get a copy of that?
Of course, they can just look for us in the website is ccn-law.com. And what we do is that if you're interested in getting it, or they can contact me and I can put them in a list. So we provide news about what's going on in Mexico, legal situation, also in the market and politics. We have what we call 300 words, which is former a government official that is now of counsel to us, and he writes about that overall situation in Mexico. So legally and everything you can find in that. We try to give you updates. And we have also we just finished our nearshoring guide. If anybody's interested, I'll be very glad to provide to anybody that is interested. So you can see the different sectors that you have to analyze in Mexico. It's like a summary of Mexico legal situation. So you can look at the taxes, labor, customs, etc.
Well, perfect. That's exactly what listeners need is good counsel. We appreciate you coming on today on To Navigate. We will be posting this podcast along with your contact detail, and we do encourage our listeners to go to our website at www.globaltaxfocus.com. There is a section specifically for our partners, and that's where you'll find Miriam's contact detail. We encourage you to reach out to her. You will not be disappointed. With that said, I wish you a pleasant rest of the day and look forward to speaking to you again soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim.